Well, hello there, and welcome to today's Explainer. Picture this for a second. You just finished grabbing a quick coffee with a certain friend or family member. You get into your car, shut the door, and suddenly you feel like you've just run a literal marathon. I mean, your shoulders are heavy, your mind feels totally foggy, and you are just completely depleted. But if someone asked you what happened, you couldn't even quite put your finger on why you feel so exhausted. Well, today we are diving deep into the fascinating psychological science of relational hygiene. We're going to examine exactly how we can protect our mental energy from those dynamics that quietly drain us, and we'll explore why choosing to step away is actually a measured psychological necessity.
So, right off the bat, I want you to consider a fundamental question here. Are your relationships draining your vital mental reserves? You see, psychology actually shows us that feeling physically and mentally exhausted after interacting with certain people, that is not a personal failing. It's definitely not a lack of stamina on your part. It is actually a highly measurable psychological phenomenon. Think of your mind kind of like a bank ledger, constantly calculating deposits and withdrawals. Every single interaction is a transaction. And honestly, with some individuals, your mind is accurately calculating a severe, totally unsustainable deficit.
Okay, let's dive right into this structural blueprint. Today we're covering Section 1, Evaluating Mental Energy. Section 2, Identifying the Energy Drainers. Section 3, Mechanics of Emotional Manipulation. Section 4, The Science of Staying Calm. And finally, Section 5, Protecting Your Mental Peace. Let's get moving.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, Evaluating Mental Energy, or as we like to call it, the economy of the mind.
Before we can truly grasp how other people drain us, we've got to understand our own internal battery. And this brings us to a really crucial concept: cognitive fatigue. It's defined as sustained thinking, anticipating, and evaluating that consumes real, measurable energy before physical action even begins. This perfectly validates that sort of lazy but ambitious mindset. Your mind rarely rests, right? Imagine staring at a blank screen, trying to draft an email to a super intimidating colleague. You haven't typed a single word yet, but you are already exhausted. Why? Well, because your brain is trying to mathematically calculate how to make conditions perfectly safe. You're wiped out because your brain is already working massive overtime. And this brilliantly illustrates how your energy is actually divided up every day. Just look at this. A staggering amount of your mental pie goes entirely into anticipation and planning. The second largest chunk, that goes toward evaluating choices and, obsessing over potential outcomes. Physical action, the actual doing of the thing, is literally just a fraction of the total energy spent. So much of your mental vitality is burned before you even move a single muscle. This proves, for sure, that your mental peace is a highly valuable, incredibly finite resource. You simply cannot afford to just hand over those limited reserves to anyone who asks. Moving right along to Section 2, Identifying the Energy Drainers, let's look at what happens when relationships really tax the system. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how objectively we can map out toxic behaviors to literal physical stress responses in our bodies. Harmful behaviors aren't just annoying on a surface level, they trigger profound biological reactions. Look at the table. When there's a boundary violation, your brain immediately jumps into defense mode. If you're in an unsafe dynamic, boom, your nervous system is in distress. And guilt manipulation, that leads straight to confusion and self-doubt. Your body literally knows a relationship is toxic way before your conscious mind wants to admit it. Let's zero in on boundary violations first. Everyone has personal limits, right? Imagine telling a friend, calmly and clearly, "Hey, I'm not okay with you joking about my career." And then, the very next time you see them, they do it anyway, and maybe they even call you too sensitive. Listen, that is not a simple misunderstanding. That is a calculated pattern of disrespect. And biologically, your brain gets locked in this perpetual defense mode, flooding your whole system with cortisol, which directly causes severe stress and emotional exhaustion. Just think about this stark contrast between these two states. In healthy dynamics, sure, you have disagreements. People argue. But those disagreements remain respectful and you still feel secure afterward. But in unhealthy dynamics, you find yourself constantly walking on eggshells. You feel tense, perpetually anxious, or just made to feel incredibly small. Psychology tells us our nervous system reacts aggressively to these unsafe dynamics. Honestly, if you consistently feel worse about yourself after hanging out with someone, your nervous system is acting like a brilliant alarm bell. It is accurately detecting a threat. All right, let's hit Section 3, Mechanics of Emotional Manipulation. We need to expose the actual tactics of control here. Let's really unpack these psychological warning signs because they are incredibly sneaky.
Draining individuals rarely try to control you overtly. Instead, they weaponize guilt and fear. They'll make you entirely responsible for managing their messy emotions. But perhaps the absolute worst tactic: twisting reality. Have you ever brought up a totally legitimate issue to someone, and by the end of the conversation, somehow you're consoling them, and you are the one apologizing? Yeah. That psychological whiplash creates massive self-doubt. It's designed to make you question your own reality. And make no mistake, that dynamic is not love, and it's certainly not friendship. That is purely about control. A relationship simply cannot be a one-way street. Emotional support, respect, and accountability absolutely must come from both sides. Let's bring back our bank account metaphor for a second. If you are always the one calling first, always the one initiating the apologies to keep the peace, always understanding but never actually being understood, you are funding a massive relational deficit. And that extreme imbalance, it inevitably leads to quiet resentment, total burnout, and an utterly depleted mental bank account.
And I really want to emphasize this deeply important psychological truth right here. Repeated behavior is a strong predictor of future behavior. Look, everyone makes mistakes, for sure, but what actually matters is tangible change. If you've clearly expressed your concerns, patiently explained your feelings, given them multiple chances, and the exact same harmful behavior continues, staying in that cycle means you are actively accepting that it will literally never improve.
So what do we do? Section 4, the science of staying calm. Let's look at your protocol for reaction. It all starts with the absolute mastery of emotional regulation. Now, let's be super clear. Calm people are not just emotionally numb robots. They aren't passive. They still feel intense anger and stress when provoked. The secret difference lies entirely in their mechanics. They pause. They consciously create a gap between the trigger and the response, allowing the rational, thinking part of the brain to grab the steering wheel instead of the reactive, emotional part. This is a learned scientific skill, and it is your absolute best defense. Let's move to the next slide and see how this builds into a practical protocol. Step 1, consciously slow down your response. Neuroscience shows that just taking a single breath before replying immediately drops your cortisol. Step 2 is practicing low personalization, which is huge, and we'll unpack it in a second. Step 3 is accepting uncertainty, basically letting go of the need to control their narrative. And step 4 is separating your raw emotion from your calculated action. But let's look closer at step 2 because, honestly, it's a total game changer. This is the concept of low personalization. I really want you to treat this as a major revelation. Low personalization acts like an invisible psychological shield. It's the fundamental understanding that most chaotic reactions from other people, they're about their own unmanaged stress, their own insecurity, or their own pressure. It is very, very rarely an accurate reflection of your worth. Realizing this prevents those massive emotional spikes in your brain. It lets you stay detached, observe their behavior like a scientist in a lab, and focus strictly on the boundaries you can actually control. Which brings us to our final phase, Section 5, protecting your mental peace, and the rational cutoff. We really need to internalize this. Feeling something doesn't mean acting on it. Having high emotional intelligence means you allow yourself the grace to feel. You might feel immense guilt or genuine sadness about ending a relationship, but feeling something doesn't mean you have to reverse your decision. Think of it kind of like looking at an old, broken-down car you used to drive. You can feel incredibly nostalgic about the fun road trips you took in it, but that doesn't mean you should rely on it for your daily commute to work today. You can acknowledge the profound sadness of a loss while still separating that emotion from the totally rational action of stepping away. I want you to carry this core mantra with you. Peace is more important than history. So often, we fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy in our social lives. We stay intensely connected to highly toxic people, purely out of a shared history or some misplaced loyalty. But hear this clearly. Not every relationship deserves unlimited, lifetime access to your energy. Protecting your mental health has to take priority over simply the length of time you've known someone. So the crucial point is, when you finally take that courageous step to protect yourself, how much guilt should you ultimately feel? 0. That is the exact amount of guilt you should carry for stepping away from a manipulative dynamic to restore harmony in your life. Removing someone's access to you is not an act of malice. It's just a fundamental act of preservation. Which leaves us with one final, deeply important question to reflect on today. Will you continue to fund a one-sided relationship with your invaluable mental energy? Armed with the psychological science of relational hygiene, the choice is now entirely in your hands. You've got the tools to evaluate your energy, spot the drainers, and deploy the protocol to stay grounded. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I urge you to take these insights, apply them to your daily life, and rationally prioritize your own well-being. Catch you next time.